Hello, everyone, and happy to be here again to discuss and learn more about the North American outdoors industry with you and our guests. So, the topic for today is one that I know that will interest a lot of you that have called in today. How do you actually find those partners that can actually help you grow your brand? And when you found them, how should you go around in making them interested in working with you? Last time we focused on learning more from our Swedish brands, and this time around we have invited guests from some very, very interesting organizations. First of all, I would love to welcome and invite my colleague Elma, based in California. So Elma, please tell us more about your perspective in finding Swedish companies the absolutely best partners.
Hi there, Emre, and thank you for having us here again. I am so excited that we have a full hour on this important topic. I would say that no matter which conversation I am with Swedish companies, the question around partnerships, and we're talking here third-party logistics partners, we're talking sales reps organizations, and also distributors. This question always pops up, right? Even if you're willing to employ your own people here in the US, you will find that with the big regions and how to cover the entire nation, if you want to grow and be a national player, partnerships is the way to go. So a couple of things, if I just start off the discussion from my end in what I'm seeing from the Swedish side, and a couple of advice that I would give. First of them being, if you want to find a good partner, you have to be able to show that you are committed to the US market. So no one of these, and I assume our sales reps will support me in this, no one is really interested to bring in a Swedish company that hasn't really decided on their commitment to the US. So that means you have to, even if you sign up partners, you still have to be close to the US in, if that is holding training sessions, being able to answer questions, or just prepare marketing material with a US feel. Those are still things that will be expected from you. I think the second thing that I would want to highlight is being prepared to actually sign on your partners. I've seen so many cases where we are working very hard to find a good partner. They are interested, and then when it comes to signing, either you're not mentally prepared to have this go as quickly as the US partner, or you're not prepared with your agreements or anything to send over. And I would just say that I don't want to, add on to cliches here, but the US just works a little bit quicker than, for example, Canada, in my opinion, but especially compared to Europe. If you get attention and a partner that wants to sign up with you, please be prepared, because you can lose the interest quickly as well. And then lastly, I just want to say that please practice your pitch. We have very different cultural ways of doing business in Sweden versus the US. Remember that when you're talking to partners, if that is a distributor or a sales rep, you're not really selling them your product, right? You're selling them that business idea and that business opportunity. So remember to have your pitch around that. Why should they bring in you, especially if you are, with less of a track record here in the US? You need to show them why your product will work on the US market and how you will support them to be successful as well. So those are just a couple of things that I've come across in the work that I've been doing here in the US, but I'll let you have our expert talk more, of course, and super happy from Business Sweden side, of course, to support in any of these things going forward.
Exactly. So commitment is the word you're thinking about. Thank you very much, Elma. I will get back to you later in the hour, but first, let's invite Gustaf from Koala Marketing, the owner of the brand and product called Omnia, So Omnia was introduced to the US market a couple of years ago. They established a legal entity and set up a third-party logistics in the Midwest and pursued some bigger retails directly from Sweden. In 2022, they decided that it was time to really look into establishing partnerships. Gustaf, would you like to describe the background and drivers for finding partnerships?
Thank you. Of course, I mean, since going over to the US, we brought our European business models and our European experiences, and as many others, we underestimated the size of the US market and all the different differences in the segments. So after trying in the RV segment, finding ourselves in the overlanding segments, we decided together with Business Sweden to really do this as a project to find partners in the outdoor industry. So, I mean, a lot of database work, a lot of discussions, ended up in a couple of really good partnerships that we still work with and try to grow together with.
Thank you. I mean, the next question at hand, what did you find the hardest in the introduction calls when signing up for new sales reps? What were your worries and what was the most of the discussions based around?
I mean, we are still quite small and we have not very much of worries. It's more curiosity. I mean, we are very confident in our product itself. So it was more like we were curious about what question will we get, and what we found out is that the margin expectations of the retailers, for example, is very different from the different segments within the same country, and also within the segment, but different regions. So I mean, there was a lot of margins discussions, a lot of quantity discussions, volume discussions that we are still working with and try to find a good way to I mean, balance logistic input to the sales and the consumer, B2B consumer, and also of course the end consumer.
Thank you. And the next question, what is your experience from having worked with a couple of sales reps for a while now?
I mean, they're very different, of course. I mean, different people, different organizations, different sizes of organizations. So that needs to be, I mean, it's like employment relationships. So you need to be very sensitive how you work with the different organizations. And also, I mean, the time perspective, that you really need to invest time and be patient and accept and understand that people and organizations are working differently with different time perspectives.
So two big curious ears and one mouth.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, great. I mean, the next question, the Omnia oven is sold not only to outdoor retailers, but also through RV and marine segments. How have you handled that between signing up sales reps, distributors covering different segments?
That was actually a big question, especially in the beginning, because I mean, the reps that we started to work with, of course, wanted their territory and their geographical territory, but still maybe didn't go to from outdoor sales rep to RV store or RV distributors. So when we went into sales rep organizations on the RV segment as well, we found ourselves with a list of retailers and distributors that the RV sales rep will work with and call on, and basically the rest will be on the other side. So that has turned out very well, and no one is like in conflict. So they can, I think they can work parallel in the same district, so to speak.
Okay. Thank you very much for those insightful words and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just like mentioned, Omnia started their US sales by having their own warehouse solution in the US, from which they could serve some bigger customers themselves. Finding and setting up a 3PL or own warehouse is of course a big commitment for any brand, as it will increase complexity in the supply chain and carry risk with generally higher inventory levels. So, moving on, our next guest is Ron Roman from Bergen Logistics. You help Swedish and American companies that want to set up their warehouses in the US. If we start with the simple question of what is the most important factor that foreign companies should think about before starting the process?
We said it, commitment. I think that commitment is definitely a great point to start with. I do think that, you know, a company that is thinking to start exporting into the US needs to make a business decision as to are we going to be doing only B2B? Are we going to be selling direct to consumer? Are we going to be selling drop ship? And eventually, are we going to open up our own retail stores here and there? So all those points are critical in deciding who your 3PL. I think that also your product type should determine where and who you should be doing business with. Some 3PLs are better than others for different types of products, of course, and the distribution models that we spoke about. And I do think that technology is a very, very big part of the decision making. Looking at who your 3PL is and how do they integrate to your systems. All that would play a big factor in if I had to pick a 3PL for my business. Short of setting up my own warehouse, of course, which is a whole different conversation.
Yeah, thank you. We could take that another time. So, I mean, how does the cost structure look like?
So it really depends. Typically, it's based on the type of product, quantities, the average order volume, and then of course freight. Your biggest expense after product is certainly going to be the freight to the consumer or freight to some retailers, unless the retailers pay for it, of course. But yeah, so looking at all that is not less important.
Thank you. I mean, what questions should Swedish companies ask a potential 3PL partner before signing anything with them?
The pre-call, we spoke a little bit about geographic location. So I think first you have to decide where do I want to sell in the US? The US is just like in Europe, you have different regions, different climates, and theoretically you will have some regions that you would have more sales than others. So determining where it is you're located. So finding out where the locations are, could they split inventory for you? Again, I will touch upon technology because I do think it's probably one of the most important parts of the decision factors. What does the technology look like? What type of automation do you have, and will that apply to my products? What type of freight agreements do you have, and can we tap into those to save us money on outbound freight to consumers? Can you customize our packaging? For how do you brand me? Are you going to be using generic boxes? Can you use our boxes like many of our clients do? All those parts are super important.
Thank you very much.
One more thing that's important is how do you deal with peaks, which inevitably will
very interesting.
Come into play.
Yes, I mean, our most common question that we get is where should we have where should you have your 3PL and warehouse? And what are your thoughts about that?
It all depends on how many SKUs a company carries. If you have limited number of SKUs and they're repetitive, meaning you're not creating a brand new SKU count every season, you could do a split inventory position where you would put some product. And again, this is assuming that you're selling across the US, big country. You could be placing some of your product on the East Coast, some on the West Coast. The peaks are typically, from what I've seen, they are on the coasts. So that's where the majority of the people live, and that's where most of the business is conducted. So again, if you have a small number of SKU count, you could split inventory. Otherwise, you could do certainly a middle of the country, one warehouse. But then you're paying, more on the inbound. So you're losing time on inbound, whether it's coming in from Sweden or it's coming in from Asia or anywhere else in the world. You still have to rail it most likely into the middle of the country. So looking at the type of product, number of SKUs, and there's really no one size fits all. There's so many. We work with 500 brands. Every single one of them has different requirements and different, and really a different business. So you sort of tailor a solution to what's right for that specific brand.
Great advice, and a big thank you, Ron. Let's now move into the sales part of things. We are very excited that we have 2 sales reps organizations here with us today. As you will recall from the report with Elma and the team, which they have sent out, sales rep organizations work as a prolonged sales arm for companies, and we will soon learn more about how they work. First of all, let us do quick introductions. If I give you 1 minute each, could you quickly describe your organizations, where you operate, and something about the brands you currently have in your portfolio?
Well, I'm Scott Lynch. I work for the Outdoor Reps Association in Madison, Wisconsin, which is the north central part of the U.S. And we're actually a trade association of sales rep agencies. And so I have a number of agencies that are members of our group, and we work to produce shows and in other ways connect them with the retail customers, the retailer customers, the stores that sell the final product. So the show format is a very popular way to go. It's very focused, efficient use of people's time, and they're typically regional. And so in our case, we bring people in from probably 9 or so states. And relative to what you'll hear from Terry, my colleague, our region has a much lower population density and everything is much more spread out. And so that really changes what a sales rep needs to accomplish with the resources that they have. But just as a general matter, what we typically see are sales rep agencies that work on a commission-only basis with an established brand. If there's a brand that's working to establish itself, they might have some sort of a stipend or retainer that they could pay to a sales rep agency to assist them as they build some momentum. But it takes a long time to establish these brands from scratch, and a commission-only basis is a very difficult way to engage in that sort of work because it can be years before the association is profitable. So oftentimes a company that's entering into the space might have some guaranteed payments to make that cost effective for them.
Thanks, Scott. I agree with almost everything you have said. Spot on. This is Terry Wilson. I'm with 360 Adventure Collective. Our association is 44 years old. We have about 700 members, and we service 21 states on the east coast of the U.S. and basically Maine to Florida. We produce 14 private non-consumer trade shows a year. Some of these are indoor in traditional settings, and some of these are outdoor on snow demos and paddle sport demos. But the goal is to service the specialty retail market. We have some members that work with smaller mom and pop shops, some with regional players that have 8 to 10 to 12 locations. And some of these guys actually focus on larger national chains. So depending on how their contract is structured with the brand and the company will determine what their portfolio of business looks like.
Okay. I mean, we have a few questions at hand. I mean, what can you expect from your sales rep organizations to help you with, and what will you need to do yourself as a Swedish brand entering the US?
Scott, you want me to jump on this one first? So what you should expect from a trade association is a helping hand in locating a viable partner. We have a search engine on our website which can initiate a search for sales reps, but the association should be able to help you narrow down the best candidates to speak with. And then from that standpoint, it's going to be a negotiation between the sales rep and the brand as far as how they want that contract to look. As Scott mentioned, when you're a new brand coming into a market and you're trying to pioneer a brand, a lot of times it's 3 to 4 years of hard work before they actually start seeing a viable profit on that. However, it's possible to write contracts, and we see them every day because they're all uniquely different with members, that there can be a higher commission structure and when you're in the pioneering standpoint, as that brand starts to get traction and gain some sales, those commission structures can be scaled back proportionate, because now you're not spending as much time pioneering as you are reselling and selling new components, but you've now got the brand established where you want to have it established. And one thing that Scott mentioned as well, you know, the United States is a diversely different country. What sells in New England does not necessarily sell in Florida, or what sells in Arizona does not necessarily sell in Washington State or Oregon State. So the product mix can vary dramatically. And we've seen brands that have come to the US have focused in specific regions because that product speaks to the heart of the end consumer in a way that makes it viable. So it's very possible that you could come in and only cover Midwest, upper Midwest to New England, and only be in that tier state area with your product and never go any further south than that area. So it really depends on the product and how it resonates with the end consumer.
And if I could just add on top of what Terry's saying, to the original question of, you know, what can you expect from a sales rep? Fundamentally, a sales rep is the face of a brand to the store. And the advantage to a sales rep is it's a person who already has a relationship of trust with the customer that you want to do business with. And so that's what you get when you enter into business with a sales rep, is you're essentially buying into a relationship with someone and investing in that trust. And I think to everyone else's prior point about, you know, be ready, be clear about what you want to achieve, and be prepared to be patient. I think the thing is, you're getting in business with someone who has a relationship of trust, and they're making promises on your behalf, and you need to be prepared with your attitude and with your logistics to keep those promises. Because we've seen over and over again that very successful companies have tried to enter the United States market, and if they're not prepared to keep those promises, nobody wants to do business with them anymore because they have gotten a reputation of being not reliable business partners.
So true, Scott and Terry. Thank you very much. The next question: what is the best approach to find the best sales rep organizations, and get their actual attention?
Scott, I'll be glad to go ahead and start this round, and you can jump in a minute. The best way to get there, all right, you need to get your elevator speech down. And when I say that, it is you need your talking points. It's a one paragraph talking point about your brand, what your mission is, and who you're trying to attract as a customer. And if that will catch their attention, then you've now got a chance, an open dialogue with that sales rep to drill into the specifics. But really, you need to have that one paragraph elevator speech down, and it needs to be polished so it makes total sense. There's no ambiguity as far as understanding it. You know exactly what you're trying to accomplish.
Go ahead, Scott.
And I think once you get into a conversation, you need to convey the level of seriousness that you represent. The most desirable and successful sales rep agencies have been in the game for some time. They've had some successes and they've had some failures. And I would encourage anyone to really have a conversation, because even though from a contractual perspective, these people, they don't technically work for you. They technically work for themselves and they contract to you. But when they talk about your brand, they're going to say, what we are doing this year is. Mm-hmm. And they feel like they're part of your organization. And so it's like hiring an employee that is going to be one of your most trusted people, because you're going to send them out there to tell your story on your behalf. So get to know them, get to know their experience. And I think that the best thing that you can do is try to find someone that you can inspire some passion for what you're doing, so that they become not just a salesperson, but really an evangelist for what your brand and your products represent.
Rub off.
And it takes time.
Yeah, rub off some of that passion.
Whatever the magic dust is that you put into your product, you have to make sure that they get a good whiff of it.
Great, Terry and Scott. The next question, difference between sales rep organizations and distributors. Can you have both?
I think Scott, I'll go ahead and jump in. I think you can have both. We see this even in the East Coast that we service. A lot of times, though, you will see a distributor work a specific trade channel of retail. So in the United States, there is a large group of Ace Hardware stores. They tend to be all over rural America. And we've seen distributors work with Ace Hardware, and yet in the same states and in the same areas, there will be a sales rep working the exact same product in a different trade channel. It may be specialty retail, or it could be automotive. It could be whatever, but it's a different trade channel totally. So I think you can have both. It's not a common thing to see in the US, but I have seen it coexist before.
What do you think, Scott?
Speaking on a little bit different angle, if you're thinking about a specific channel such as outdoor specialty, I think if you work with a distributor, in our business culture, the distributor acts as the sales agency. And so they might have reps that they use, but essentially the distributor is the master buyer of your product, and then they essentially sell it almost as if it's their own. The way that the distributor model would work within the outdoor space is that they would do warehousing and sales. And so it's in a sense an all-in-one solution, and the cost of it is everyone's margins are a little bit shorter because everyone in that chain needs to make a decent profit. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot to recommend the distributor model in terms of simplicity, because from a manufacturer's perspective, you're shipping everything to a single point. You have someone else that's really worrying about the billing and all that sort of thing with the individual stores. But the downside for you as a manufacturer is that you need to give them enough of a discount that they can still resell it to the stores. They can make a wholesale margin, and then the stores again can make their retail margin. So it is a simplified process, but it also is potentially a less profitable process.
I'd like
Yes,
to
Ron.
add to what Scott. I'd like to add to what Scott just said. I think that there is a risk in that setup, an additional risk of having essentially only one client that controls everything that you do in the U.S. So if if for whatever reason the business doesn't work between your company and the distributor, you're now, they own the market, they own the retailers' relationships, they own, the distribution, they own the importation, they own really all your whole business in the U.S. Very, very risky versus, you hiring specific, different reps or different rep groups for different regions. And then if one doesn't work, you replace them and so on and so forth. So again, the intent of doing business and really going for it, like we discussed at the beginning.
Great. I mean, Scott, let's start off with you with the last question here. How much sales do you need to have before signing up with a sales rep?
I think it can depend a little bit on how much they've bought into your story and how much they see, and also where they are in their career. If you're able to connect your brand story with a mature agency that has the resources, they might be willing to invest more time before it becomes profitable. But if you get involved with someone who's newer in their career, they really need the cash flow to get things going. So I kind of polled some of my members about this, and I mean, I think you need to be able to have a sales rep agency be able to generate earnings in the tens of thousands of dollars. So, I mean, if we look at commission structure, you figure most of the products in the outdoor industry, the rep is going to earn often 8 to 12% of the net invoice amount is a typical commission structure. So enough sales such that they can earn, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in commissions at that kind of 8 to 12% level. That's the point where, because they're incurring a lot of expenses in that. They're paying for the trade show fees, they're paying for the gasoline and the hotel stays to travel around the country and see everyone. So they need to have enough income on your brand to be able to afford to incur those expenses and still have some profit at the end. I talked to a very experienced sales rep who said they would not take on a brand if they did not think that they could get $3 million in sales within 3 years. And that's just one territory. And as I mentioned at the outset, this is a territory that has lower population and lower population density. So people in Terry's part of the country probably have a higher standard than that because everything is more expensive in that part of the country. And so the reps have to earn more in order to cover their costs.
What do you say about that, Terry? Your thoughts?
Scott's right on he's spot on what he's saying. I mean, it also depends too on their portfolio of brands that they have. If it's a newer brand, if it's a new brand coming to the country that needs to be pioneered and the rep is patient to let that grow, they may have 2 or 3 other brands that they're making 80% of their money on that they need to exist with in a given year. And if they're willing to pioneer the brand and give it time to grow, obviously they will make money on it. So most reps in an agency, when somebody calls us and says, hey, we need to hire another rep for our agency, we're growing, they generally are looking at the same numbers, the 2 to 3 million mark that Scott said. They need to generate those in sales to pay for themselves, to cover all their travel expenses. And then when it's at the end of the year, they still have a modest income that they have earned for themselves. But you can do that with a pioneering brand. You just need a couple of years to allow it to grow. And it also depends on the rep. I know of reps that have 15 to 20 accessory brands, and they are monikered as an accessory rep. They don't make $1 million with each brand, but they make enough with each brand on a recurring reorder basis that it works for them. So again, this is the brand coming to the US and finding the right partner sales rep to work with specific. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 2 to 3 million in sales based on the rep and based on their portfolio of brands and who they sell to and how they sell that product.
I mean, very insightful, Scott and Terry. Thank you very much. We have now come to our last guest of today, and that will be Matt Huff at Sport Hansa. Welcome, Matt. We know you from the Outdoors Report, as you are representing the Swedish brand Hultsbruk that does access and has successfully gotten them into retail chains such as REI.
Hello.
Yes, hello. If we on one side say that distribution and taking full ownership of brand's growth in North America is uncommon, you seem to be one of few exceptions to that rule. I mean, from your perspective, why have you been successful with getting the Hultsbruk brand out there?
Well, maybe just let me give you a little bit of background about my company and my team.
Please, go ahead.
We're in Asheville, North Carolina, which is in the southeast, and started the company in 2010. And in the case of Hultsbruk, we started working with them. It was a new entrant to the market in 2015. And part of my distribution company's philosophy really is to keep a really transparent relationship with the brands in Europe. We've successfully entered 9 European brands into the U.S. market. And that means, for example, we invite the European sales managers, so my colleague in Sweden or in Norway or in France, for example, to come and travel with me and actually meet the retailers, so it's completely transparent. And for example, when we have gotten these retailers going, we then share who the retailers are. So at the branded retailer map at their website, they can list where the end consumer goes to buy products. So, really, the information does need to share both ways, or it can be like what Ron was discussing, which is a situation where you become overly dependent on your distributor. But it doesn't. I would argue it doesn't have to be like that. I think it works well sharing the information both ways. But in terms of sort of success for Hultsbruk specifically, really the very first step was to think really carefully before even launching. Does the U.S. market really need a premium axe that retails between $150 and $230? And in this case, we determined it does. But there were actually some other candidate companies who were making products, certain hosiery and so on and so forth, where the market just didn't need another sock brand, for example. And so sometimes one of the first steps of being a distributor is to sort of give people the bad news that no, it probably is not worth trying this market. And it's ugly, but you have to hear that news sometimes. For us there with Hultsbruk, what really, really made a difference was discipline in pricing. So we instituted something called MAP pricing, which is mentioned in the report. And just in a nutshell, MAP pricing is where a brand can tell a retailer, listen, you need to be selling at this certain price level. Don't discount. And you're sort of forcing the retailer to make a decent margin. And you're also shielding that retailer from being embarrassed when someone comes in with their phone and says, hey, look, I can buy this for $40 cheaper at another retailer. So it's a really powerful tool. And I think as a new entrant, it was the absolute driving force behind becoming established and getting credibility. Because, as everyone's mentioned, pioneering brands is tricky and scary. But if there's that legitimacy of price discipline, it's a real catalyst to getting there. And then the other thing that we did with Hultsbruk was understand the life cycle of a brand's entrant and its milestones of entering the U.S. market. For example, just that first retailer who takes it, and then the first good product review, and so on and so forth. the big stores, the REIs and the Public Lands and the Dick's Sporting Goods are not pioneering brands. But when they start having end consumers coming into their stores asking, for example, for Holzbrook, that's when I then get the call from the buyer saying, hey, we want to hear more about this brand. But it's not going to happen until there's sort of a network of specialty retailers carrying the product in the first place. And that's fine. But it's a time horizon that sort of has certain milestones, and that's something a distributor can help a brand work with.
Thank you very much. I mean, it seems like distributors like yourself are hard to find in the US. Would you agree? And what is the reason for you? I mean, for that, do you think?
Well, yeah, it goes back to what everyone else has been talking about. Pioneering, starting up is expensive and uncertain. The same way it affects reps, it affects distributors too. Just to risk investing in a brand and not having it play out as a lost opportunity and wasteful. Americans, I think, and Swedes and Europeans, people sort of are gravitating toward brands they know. That's just the whole nature of brands, and so it's always a bit hard to get started. And I think one thing that's happened with some of the bigger distributors in our industry is that they've gotten growth by bringing in lots and lots of brands. So there are some distributors who will have a catalog that'll be as big as a telephone book because they'll have so many brands, and that's how they've done it. But no, I don't know. I don't have a really easy answer for that. It's just it's a slog. I mean, it just takes time.
I mean, how have you been working on the branding and marketing messaging when it comes to the Holzbrook brand? What has been, the key success factors for you?
Well, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking, engaging end consumers. So first and foremost, if you have the end consumer walking into a store and asking the owner, do you have Holzbrook? And if they don't, that's the greatest, because then the store will contact the brand and say, my customers are coming in and want to know about this. Another thing that's worked for marketing and branding is to be really open to new categories. So let me use the case of Holzbrook. You'd probably think that an axe would do really well in an outdoor store, or perhaps a hardware store, or an arborist. But to our surprise, we actually found out that axes do well in men's boutiques. So the kind of store where someone is spending $300 for a pair of jeans lends itself to a $179 axe. Who knew? Who would have thought? And there's cases where we have jewelry stores who are asking for 6 axes at a time. And so we ask ourselves, why? It's for groomsmen's gifts. There is no better gift to your groomsmen than a hand-forged Swedish axe. So, but if you sort of get yourself siloed into thinking, oh, I've just got to be in hardware or outdoor, you could really miss this great broad market. So I think there's more than just regionalism in this country. There's also really interesting sort of segments, retail segments, where your product line may have a home that you never expected. So be really open to that, because that's a real chance to get some upside sales and upside growth.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Matt. Axes are of course one of the product groups that can be sold across many different segments, pure outdoors, but also hunting, fishing, hardware stores, etc. How should brands that have products across different segments think and act on the US market?
Well, as I mentioned, just be open-minded to different categories. If you can, from the very beginning, early on in the life cycle of your project, is try not to be too specific in your marketing materials and even perhaps your instruction materials, so that you can capture as broad a base as you can. And then one thing I put just a note is America is sort of a very political place. So when you're selling, be aware of the fact that I will have one buyer who will put his prepositions, and then the other one who will put his National Rifle Association lifetime membership number. So you sort of have to walk a fine line and be willing to just talk about the weather, and just be very careful about that. And so be flexible about the kind of people that.
Yeah. Elma, I'd like to open up the floor for you for some questions that you might have as well.
to dig a little bit deeper into this, and that is the product portfolio that either the sales rep or distributor carries, and how to think about, complementary, but maybe also competition brands for yourself. And I think this question could be interesting both for Gustaf and Omnia, and the thoughts from the brand perspective, but then of course also from you guys on the sales rep and distributor side.
Yeah, let's take it for, Gustaf, what do you think?
As we don't have any specific, hard-on competition brands as it is like now, we really like when we have complementary products in the portfolio, if there is, because we think that, that could be a good thing for both ourselves and the other brand, and also for the sales person, either if it's a rep or employee or distributor that want to talk to the customer about the products. I think there could be good things for everybody involved, actually. So like complementary brands.
What about Terry and Scott, Matt and Ron?
I would certainly say that looking at a sales rep's portfolio of brands and finding an agency that has brands that are compatible with what you do is a time-honored and very successful way to identify likely candidates. And so I know in our case for our association's website, and I'm sure that's the case for Terry's association too, you can go and look at, if there's a particular brand that you think is a good indicator, find out who the sales rep is on that, and maybe try to contact them directly and say, we have this opportunity. We think it goes really well with what you're currently doing. As far as the competing brands things go, I think it's certainly the case. I have seen as an established company that's very profitable for a rep expands into a new category, it can be the case that they then have to drop other brands. They just make the case of, well, this one's more profitable for us, and they are now selling tents. So I guess we'll have to let our other tent brand go because it's not as profitable for us.
I agree 100% with what Scott said. I think that, especially for a new emerging brand that's coming into the country, I typically tell brands, when they ask what retailers we should go after, I typically say them, look at your competitors, see who they're selling to. You want to be in those same stores, and that's the same methodology to pick a sales rep. See who's selling your competition and go for it.
Matt,
Yeah,
yes, go along.
I was going to say that, for me in the distributorship world, so my distributorship focuses only on really premium items, generally family-run businesses. And this is interesting. My retailers ask me, what's next? What else have you found in Europe? They expect me to be the one who's going out and finding really great stuff in Europe, which is great. I love doing that. So there's no issue at all. It's a big market. It's a massive market. So it's not as if, if we're bringing in a Norwegian knife brand and then we bring in a Spanish knife brand, when you're in a niche, it's a drop in the bucket. So no one's really going to get too worried. But in our world, our retailers expect us to go out and find competitive but complementary stuff at the same time.
Yeah. Terry, what do you say?
I agree with everything that's been said on this. The most important component that you're looking for is, do they know the correct buyer to speak with about this product? If it's an independent shop, then the owner's going to wear all the hats. He's going to buy every category of product. If it's a regional player that has 10 to 12 to 15 stores, they will probably have category-specific buyers. So, again, back to the example of the Swedish axe. You've got a beautiful $150 MSRP axe, and he may also be selling some price point commodity tools as well. They can coexist in that same portfolio because you're going to really be hitting different consumers, but he's talking to the correct buyer if he has the other product brand. A question that, or a thought I would like to leave some of the brands that are on this webinar call on questions to ask a potential sales rep. If they have a portfolio of brands and they pick up your brand, how are they going to present it and sell it? And the correct answer, I'm being very presumptuous when I say this, but the correct answer is they have an appointment with a buyer. And let's just say he's an owner that is buying all categories. He has an appointment. He's going to start out with your product first because it's brand new. And he already has that buyer's attention because he's waiting to see the steak that you brought to the party later on in that conversation. So if they're pitching and presenting your product first, they already have their attention. If they wait till it's the end of the presentation, the buyer's interest has already waned and they're not going to remember anything. To me, that's just that's sales rep 101 on how you sell new product. But that's a question I think that's worthy of asking any potential partner that you're going to work with.
Great, Terry. Great insight there. Lastly, one question we at Business Sweden often get is what types of margins that the different players across the value chain will expect. What is your usual advice when it comes to this? Terry, go along you first.
Well, most retailers want 50-point margins, meaning if they're buying it for 25, they want to sell it for 50. The accounting equation calls it a 50-point margin. If it's an accessory, they're going to want to go higher, probably 60-point margins. They're going to buy it for 25 and sell it for $60. Bigger brands, and I'll pick on the North Face and Columbia, but bigger brands will compress their margins a little bit, especially, they're large, they're generating, $3 to $5 billion globally in sales. They'll have specific product categories that will have very compressed margins. So you're relying on volume at that point to make up the difference. But for emerging brands, if you want to attract a retail partner, I think 50-point margins are the absolute minimum. And if you can go above that, you'll get their attention.
Thank you. Ron, what do you say?
In fashion, I see 225. So if they buy it for 100, they're selling for 225 to 250. Just a flip of the 50 points, 50 percent is not enough margin for them to carry because there's always leftovers at the end of the season and so on and so forth. They got to make up for that. But again, this is specific to fashion and footwear and bags and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Matt, what is your reflection on this?
Oh, sure. Yeah. My experience has been that the distributor for hard goods is generally looking in the 30% margin range, but then of course he needs to be selling to the retailers who, as you mentioned, are looking to be in the 50% range in their margin.
Thank you. Scott?
Having been a retail buyer in a past life, I would say my general rule of thumb has been, and maybe this has changed a bit, is that for what we would call hard goods equipment, 40 to 45% margin, and apparel starting at the 50% margin. And I don't know if this is a term that all of your manufacturers would be familiar with, but that would also be called a keystone margin. So buy it for $50, sell it for $100. The 50% margin, also called keystone, it's a word that you might hear. And then for accessory items, as others have said, a higher margin than that to make them very profitable, given that they usually are very low in cost.
Thank you. So the last person here in the panel then, Gustaf, what's your reflections?
Since we are still new in the country with our 5 years experience, again we see different expectations in margins and in volumes. So I think we're still. I've heard most of the things heard here now from retail customers and also sales reps, but still trying to figure out magic relation between volumes and margins. So somewhere around.
Yeah, thank you. Before we leave the floor, I would like to open up the floor again for Elma if you have any additional questions or thoughts to the group.
Yeah, so of course, the biggest question, which we maybe didn't touch that much upon today, was how do you actually, once you find the one that you want to work with, how do you get their attention? And in the pre-meeting to this, we were discussing, pre-COVID, it might have looked like a lot being on fairs, for example, outdoor retailer. We know that now post-COVID, it's been a little bit more focus on the regional fairs. But also, as a last question, maybe to you, Scott, in terms of you found the perfect sales rep, how do you actually contact them? Is that a phone call? Is that an email? Or do you have to visit the same fair as they are on? What's your advice on the actual first contact?
So I think it can be a phone call or it can be an email. One of the things that we see at trade shows is people are very busy. And so if you try to approach someone with no connection and really not any sort of, essentially without an appointment, it can be very difficult for them to have time to take you seriously. So I think, any good sales rep should have a very loose spam filter. So I don't think you should worry about getting spammed out. But it's always a risk, hearing from someone with a sales opportunity that, is from an unknown sender, or a phone call. I will say, I think in the United States in general, and certainly in my region, the Nordic countries have very positive associations, and a voicemail from someone with a charming Swedish accent will certainly get someone's attention. So I think a phone call can't hurt. An email is okay, but be concise and be specific about what it is that you're offering.
Okay, I don't know if Matt could hear me, but we're summing up this webinar right now. This brings us to the end, and I would really like to thank all of our guests, Gustaf in the studio, Elma and the entire group at Business Sweden and the US team. Thank you for showing up and a really wonderful conversation. Thank you.